Good evening to everyone. Let us start off the session by chanting Namo Tassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. All right. So today we are going to continue with the Brahmajala Sutta. I hope that you have had the time, the ability to read through the Sutta. But even if you haven't, we will be covering the Sutta. So if you would turn to page number 38 on the handout. Pubbanta Kappa. Speculations about the past. There are bhikkhus, other dhammas, deep, difficult to see, difficult to understand, peaceful and sublime, beyond the sphere of reasoning, subtle, to be known by the wise, that the Tathagata, having realized for himself with direct knowledge, expounds to others, those who, rightly praising the Tathagata, according to reality, would speak regarding these. And what are these dhammas? Deep, difficult to see, difficult to understand, peaceful and sublime, beyond the sphere of reasoning, subtle, to be known by the wise, which the Tathagata, having realized for himself with direct knowledge, expounds to others, those who, rightly praising the Tathagata, according to reality, would speak regarding these. There are bhikkhus, some recluses and Brahmins, who are spectators about the past, who hypothesize about the past and assert various dogmas regarding the past on 18 grounds. And the good recluses and Brahmins, who are speculators about the past, who hypothesize about the past, and who on 18 grounds assert various dogmas regarding the past, based on what, invoking what do they assert the 18 grounds. Now we are now going to move into, right, the grounds or the vadas which are now followed. Now on base of these vadas, the asserting and the sort of the catching on of, say, certain dhammas which are not in accordance with the Dhamma or with the Tathagata's teachings of reality takes place. That is what we are now going to see. The first one, eternalism, Sassatavada, right? Sassatavada. There are bhikkhus, certain recluses and Brahmins who are eternalists, right? Now, what is eternalism, right? Those who hold the doctrine of eternalism, right? Maintaining that things would exist, right? Who, on 4 grounds, proclaim the self and the world to be eternal. Who, on 4 grounds, proclaim the self and world to be eternal, right? To be eternal. And based on what, invoking what, do the good recluses and Brahmins, who are eternalists, on 4 grounds, proclaim the self and the world to be eternal, right? Now we are going into the 4, right? Eternal self and universe, based on recollecting up to 100,000 past lives, right? Up to 100,000 past lives. Eternal self and universe, based on recollecting up to 10 eons. eternal self and universe based on recollecting 40 eons. Eternal self and universe of the reasoner and inquirer, right? The reasoner and inquirer. Now, what this section means is now, for example, even if any one of you, or even if you have heard with regard to different people's practices, the practice of Pubbe Nivasanusati Jnana, or the recollection of past lives, people are not able to do it in the same capacity as everyone else would do. It is not a commonality. It depends. It's relative. It's relative to what? It's relative to experience, past experience with that said technique. It's relative to current circumstances, hindrances. It's relative to a lot of factors, but mainly with regard to past experience with the said technique. Are you a person who has developed Pubbhe Nivasanusati Jnana in the past? If you are, there is a higher chance of you being able to tap into deeper or more lives compared to a person who is or who could be said to be a freshman, right? That is what it means. Now, let us go through the first. Here, firstly, bhikkhus, a certain recluse or Brahmin, by means of ardor, by means of effort, by means of devotion, by means of heedfulness, by means of right attention, touches mental concentration of such a level that his mind is thus concentrated, pure, clear, unblemished, free from defilement, recalls his manifold past existence. This is to say, 1 birth, 2 birth, 3 birth, 4 birth, 5 births, 10 births, all the way up to 100,000 births, right? In this specific example, all the way up to 100,000 births. Remember, now here it says 100,000 births. Going over 500 is seen to be very difficult, right? So in most practitioners, so you can also sort of see now in the Brahmajala Sutta, the basic or the first state is said to be 100,000, right? Going beyond 500 is very, very difficult. But obviously the standard and the vigor of those of the time can also be seen here, right? So we will continue and I will go on to explain. There, I had such a name, belonged to such a clan, had such an appearance, such was my food, such my experience of pleasure and pain, such the end of my life. Passing away from that state, I re-arose there. There too, I had such a name, belonged to, so on and so forth as before. Right? Thus, he recalls his manifold past existence in their modes and their details, it goes into a great depth of detail, right? Now, for example, just imagine something as intimate, let's say when you're chewing your food, right? If you're chewing your food and it is quiet, and if you're maybe eating alone, maybe, right? You are quite aware of the different sounds, of you munching on the food. Or if you're salivating, you're aware of that. If you're looking around, whatever it is, right? In all these great details, you experience the present moment. In a very similar way, you experience this experience of Pubbhe Nivasanusati Jnana. It is of great detail, right? It is of great detail. Now, thus he recalls his manifold past existence, right? Manifold past existence in their modes and their details. He says thus, the self and the world are eternal, barren, standing like a peak, steadfast as a firm pillar. And though these beings roam and wander through samsara, fall away and re-arise, yet The self and the world remain same, just like eternity itself. Just like eternity itself. What is the reason for this? For I, by means of ardor, by means of effort, by means of devotion, heedfulness, right attention, have touched mental concentration of such a level that my mind thus concentrated, pure, clear, unblemished, free from defilement. Now I remember with regards to this technique, it is somewhat compared to a bucket of rather muddy water. When you allow the bucket to rest, the water to rest, and the sediments of mud and soil sort of settle, you now start seeing the bottom of the bucket, right? It is somewhat like that. In this, with regard to this, it is only that we think now, because we have only been able to go into or see 100,000 lifetimes or 100,000 births, we think that that is the end of the bucket, right? That is the end of the bucket. That it's almost assured, because at this time, remember, your ego, and if you're not an arahant, your ego and all of these things are there, right? Of course, to a very subtle level, but still the fact that ego exists must be sort of known, and through which it is very easy sometimes to sort of cling on to one sort of these sort of enlightening factors that one has developed in one's life. So you start believing, okay, I have the skill, so as I go through, this must be something which is then true, and then you start clinging on to the fact that, okay, things remain the same, things are eternal in that way, right? Thus he recalls his bhikkhus. This is the first reason based on which, invoking which, some recluses and Brahmins who are eternalists proclaim the self and world to be eternal, meaning that it remains the same. It remains the same through birth, right? It remains the same through birth. Now, even the fact, for example, even the fact, as humans, as Buddhists, as people who are practitioners, even the fact in our minds, we, in a subtle way, we hold uh, close to us, or we hold on to the potential reality that our next birth would also be of something similar to our present birth, right? Our next birth is also something which is similar to our next birth. In subtle ways, we cling on to this sort of life that we have, or we try to sort of build a foundation for ourselves to sort of believe in a certain way of life, right? All of those things, now we won't say that that is sort of clinging on to eternalism, but these things are, drop by drop, as a cup fills up. These are things which sort of guide us to that sort of a mind which we must actually refrain from. Knowing in the Buddha's teachings, Upaditibanga, Anitya Dukkha Anatma, rising and passing away of the Panchapadana Skandha, all of these things point out to the fact that it is impermanent, that there is constant change, and that nothing remains the same for more than its respective moment, right? For more than its respective moment, right? The second one, in a similar way, we've gone through 100,000 lifetimes. Now it goes up to 10 eons. Now, this is a very, very, very special practitioner, right? With a lot of history in the practice, or else it would be absolutely impossible for a person to go up to 10 eons. This is a very, very special practitioner, right? Very, very special practitioner. It is said that it is the Buddha who can actually go up to, how many eons is it? If someone remembers, let me know. But moving on, right? So now it is not the lifetimes, it is the contractions and expansions of the world, right? To that extent, you see. Now, in seeing, you see the arising and passing away of the world. Now, when we are referring to the world, this is actually referring to the universe, right? When we refer, when with the arising and passing away, arising and the passing away of the universe, that is what it is referring to. And when through now 10 eons, so it goes up to 1, 2, 3, up to 10 or more expansions and contractions. With this, you think, oh, the world again, the same cycle, it continues. It is the same thing that happens. It's the same thing that happens. Again, sort of cling on to the eternalism of the world, right? Clinging on to the eternalism of the world, right? Thus he recalls his manifold past existence in their modes and their details. He says thus, the self and the world are eternal, barren, standing like a peak, steadfast as a firm pillar, and through these beings roam and wander through samsara, fall away and re-arise. Yet the self and the world remain the same, just like eternal self, right? Disregarding that there is change, right? Disregarding that there is change. Now, moving on to the third one, in a similar way, now we go up to 40 eons, right? 40 eons. This 2 then going up to, now we were discussing 1, 2, up to 10. This is going up to 20, 30, 40 expansions and contractions, right? Expansions and contractions. Now, a point to remind yourself as we are going through this sutta right now, this we are discussing, or the Buddha is relating a possibility of a person who is able to go into 40 eons to fall into Sassasavada, the view of eternalism, right? May that be a motivation for you to tread on the path with a firm assertion of what is the practice and what is the Dhamma, or what is the practice and what is the Dhamma. If a person who is able to go into 40 eons of experiencing past life births, right, and yet have the potential or undergo the potential threat of experiencing Sassatavada, the view on eternalism, then what about us? Right? This is the reason that we need to not be cocky about ourselves and not to sort of have the I know it all or I can do it all sort of mentality, but to maintain that humility in sort of treading the path, right? In treading the path with the right attention, with the right sort of mindfulness and the attitude, right? Which is very important, day by day, nurturing yourself to understand the Dhamma and walk, understand the path of Dhamma properly and walk on the path, right? So even this time that you're contributing to yourself to learn Dhamma, go deep into Dhamma, is surely going to sort of affect your next life as well in terms of your Dhammic understanding. Right, in terms of your Dhammic understanding. So, if I am to remind all of you, most of you might already know, Balangada Ananda Maitreya Thero, at his sort of old age of 98, I think, if I remember correctly, he started learning computer, how to sort of manage and use a computer. And the devotee who was teaching him was like, Bhante, why do you want to learn this at this age? What are you going to do? Right? And of course, his reply was, this is for my next life. Right? So in that way, these things do have a very solid sort of base for what you could create for the future for yourself, but of course, aiming to attain or come into whatever attainments of heart right now is also very important. Moving ahead, right? Moving ahead to number 4, eternal self and universe of the reasoner and the inquirer. And fourthly, based on what? Invoking what? Do the good recluses and Brahmins who are eternalists proclaim the self and world to be eternal? Here, bhikkhus, a certain recluse or Brahmin is a reasoner, a rationalist, an inquirer or spectator, fabricating it through reasoning, having it investigated through mental inquiry by way of his own wits. He says thus: the self and world are eternal, barren, standing like a peak, steadfast as a firm pillar. And though these beings roam and wander through samsara, fall away and re-arise, yet the self and the world remain the same, just like eternity itself. Because this is the fourth reason based on which, invoking which, some recluses and Brahmins who are eternalists proclaim the self and the world to be eternal. Right? Proclaim the self and world to be eternal. It is on these 4 grounds, bhikkhus, that those recluses and Brahmins who are eternalists and proclaim the self and world to be eternal. Whatever recluses and Brahmins there may be who proclaim the self and world to be eternal, all of them do so on these 4 grounds or on any one of them. There is none beyond this. There is none beyond this. Right? I mean, in the 4th, right? This is somewhat, or this could also be somewhat, dangerous than the rest as well, because this is a person who is wholly depending on his wits, right? His wits and understanding of what he thinks is true and what he thinks is false, what he thinks is reality and what he thinks is not reality, right? And of course, if we have learned something along the way of life, is that life tends to prove us wrong again and again when we do think that we know it, or we've sort of grabbed hold of some sort of essence, right? So this is basically about a person who uses his wits in that way. Now, remember in the Abhidhamma, the chitta on doubt, right? The chitta on doubt. Now, that chitta and this is somewhat, or can work very close together. They are like best of friends, right? They are like best of friends. Because in whatever sort of time, right, there must be some sort of doubt which sort of lays foundation and way, right? Lays foundation and way. Now, when we have heard of niyata mithya drushtikas, right? People who are, what is the English word for niyata mithya drushtika? If anyone knows, you can please put it on the chat. So niyata mithya drushtika is a person who has sort of really become a person of wrong view, who holds wrong views so deeply, right? Now, fools can't become niyata mithya drushtikas, right? Now, I am using the word fool in the sense of the Pali, because it would be translated from Bala Puggala, right? Which would be translated as fool. Now, a person who is not witty, smart, intelligent cannot become a niyata mithya drushtika, right? Cannot, right? Because now, even for example, sometimes, of course, children are quite intelligent these days, but so this might be an example which is not so applicable. But if we do think about maybe ourselves when we were younger and maybe gullible, and we sort of clung on to something, we tend to sort of let it go after some couple of days or weeks, you tend to sort of fall away from it. Now, these sorts of people who we or have the potential of becoming Nitya Dushtika are people who are smart, people who are intelligent. It is those types of people who can become Niyata Mithya Dushtika. Why? Because Niyata Mithya Dushtika is not just blind-sightedly saying, oh, I don't believe in this. Why don't you believe in this? I don't want to believe in this. Now, that is not something a Niyata Mithya Dushtika would say. A Niyata Mithya Dushtika person would find a formula, a calculation, the positioning of a star, a part of history. That is the type of person who becomes a Niyata Mithya Dushtika. Right? Also, to add on to the fact that it is a similar type of person who is also able to attain enlightenment. Right? So you can either go the right way or the wrong way, depending on what kind of allowance you allow yourself. Right? Again, if we are to remind ourselves, Bala Pudgalas, or in Pali, or people who do not have, it is said that ability to think for oneself, to sort of calculate for oneself, are also the wise. It is only the wise who are able to attain and achieve a sense of enlightenment. Right? So moving on, right? Refrain, praising the Tathagata rightly. Right? Now, the bhikkhus, the Tathagata understands. And he understands thus. These standpoints, thus grasped, thus misapprehended, will lead to such a future destiny, to such a state beyond. And thus, the Tathagata understands, He understands, too, what transcends this. Yet, he does not misapprehend that understanding, cling on to that understanding. And because he is free from wrong grasping, he has known for himself, within himself, the cool, happy state. Having understood as they really are, the arising and the ending, the gratification and the danger and the escape regarding feelings, the Tathagata, bhikkhus, is freed through non-clinging. These are those truths, bhikkhus, that are deep, difficult to see, difficult to understand, peaceful and sublime, beyond the sphere of reasoning, subtle, to be known by the wise, that the Tathagata, having realized for himself, with direct knowledge, expounds to others, those who, rightly praising the Tathagata, according to reality, would speak thus. Right? Would speak thus. Partial eternalism. Ekaccha sassata bada. There are bhikkhus, some reclusers and Brahmins, who are eternalists regarding some things and non-eternalists regarding other things, and who, on 4 grounds, proclaim the self and the world to be partly eternal and partly non-eternal. And based on what, invoking what, do the good reclusers and Brahmins proclaim the self and the world to be partly eternal and partly non-eternal on 4 grounds? The Brahmas. There comes a time, bhikkhus, sooner or later, after a long period of time, when this world contracts, collapses. Right? I think you know this is with regards to the Sapta Surya Ugaha Sutta, the contractions and the expansions of the universe. When the world is contracting, beings mostly arise in the Abhasara Brahma world. There they dwell, mind-made, feeding on zest, self-luminous, moving about through space, glorious, and they stay like that for a very long time. One might imagine, how is it that closing on to the dissolution or the contraction of the world, that people tend to arise in the Abhasara plane or Abhasara Bhumi, right? Nearing to this time or closing up to this time, which can be thousands of years, by the way, right? It can be thousands of years. It's not 10 or 20 years. We at this point also we are nearing that, right? So it can be a lot of years, not 10, 20, sort of, not decades, right? So nearing to that, there is a way that the universe, the energy of the universe, in some way or the other, molds us to that position where we are able to attain to the attainments that we attain then, right? So for example, like when the Buddha rises, right, you find all of these people who attain enlightenment, right? It is of course some of them, the Buddha has sort of, prompted and all of that, right? And and this time after the Buddha's demise and most of the Arahants, demise, and 1,000, 2,600 years afterwards, now we are people again in preparation, right? In preparation either for our own enlightenment or to see the next Buddha, right? We are people who are in preparation for that enlightenment. But after some time, we will get filtered through, and somehow we will find a truth, some way or another, where we will be in the Abhasa plane. People who are unable to enter this plane will be thrown out of this Chakravala, right? Will be thrown out of the Chakravala, because by that time, there's nothing holding you back. Think of it like a magnetic pull, right? Now, as long as the belief of karma, good and bad, um, uh, the belief of karma, good and bad, Arya Ashtangika Marga, all of these sort of Paticca and all of these are there, there is some sort of attraction that our existence has upon this world. Then you might say, what about these non-Buddhist people? What about them? They tend to be doing better than us also. Right? Now, if we take the world population in general, right? In general, people do have somewhat of a pull towards this pattern of thinking of good and bad. We do have that in the world, right? It might be for the sake of another god, a religion, a thought, whatever it is. But people have a sense of good and bad. People have a sense of death, like rebirth, and the need to be good or to do good. Right? That is something which is specific for the Mangala Chakravala. Right? That is something which is specific within the Mangala Chakravala. Even if we are to take a city like, for example, London, the city of London is built around St. Paul's Cathedral, right? It is there again, we see that sort of religious attribute and aspect to this sort of civilization. Right? Similarly, if we take any sort of civilization, we find that religion or this pattern of thinking, even the most ancient of religions, right? These cities, towns, villages, all of them, if we take Sri Lanka, a village is built around a temple, isn't it? Everyone, the temple in Sri Lanka, whilst it is a place for the monks' residence and the teachings and all of that, it was, and in certain villages still is sort of like the town hall. Right? In certain villages, it is still like the town hall. And if you take, for example, in India, similar story. Right? The Hindu kovils are like the people's sort of meeting place and gathering place and all of this. Right? So we do see in this sort of world that we are in, we do see a drive towards the understanding of that which is good and that which is evil, and a constant need and struggle to be good, right? To be good. People kill in the name of God. People kill for God as well, right? All in the hope of being good in the eyes of God. The biggest delusion in the world. All right, moving on. Right, self-luminous, moving about through space, glorious, and they stay like that for a very long time. There comes a time, sooner or later, after a long period of time, when this world expands, when the world is expanding, an empty Brahma's mansion appears. Then a certain heavenly being, due to the exhaustion of his lifespan or due to the exhaustion of his merit, passes away from our Basara realm and arises in the empty Brahma's mansion. There he dwells mind-made, feeding on zest, self-luminous, moving about through space, glorious, and he stays like that for a very long time. Then, as a result, now, please, I want you to make a mental note of this. When they say he stays like that for a very long time, he is not in a depressing state. Huh? He is enjoying himself. He is having the time of his life. He is feeding off zest, right? So there is very much a sense of enjoyment which is there within his existence as a Brahma, right? As a Brahma. So there he dwells mind-made, feeding on zest, self-luminous, moving through space, glorious, and he stays like that for a very long time. Then as a result of dwelling there all along, all alone for so long, unrest, discontent, agitation arise in him thus. Oh, that other beings might come here too. Just then, a being, due to the exhaustion of his lifespan or due to the exhaustion of his merit, passes away from our Basar realm and arises in the empty Brahma's mansion in companionship with that being. There they dwell, mind-made, feeding on zest, self-luminous, moving about through space, glorious, and they stay like that for a very long time. Thereupon bhikkhus, the being who first arose there thought thus: I am Brahma, the great Brahma, the vanquisher, the unvanquished, the supreme seer of all, the Lord God, the maker, the creator, the chief, the ordainer, the almighty, the father of all that are and that will be. By me have these creatures been created. What is the reason for that? Because first I thought, oh, that other beings might come here to listen closely, right? I'm laughing inside my head, actually. The delusion. All right. For what reason? Because first I thought, oh, that other beings might come here too. And on account of this mental resolution of mine, these beings have come here. And this thought too arose in the beings who arose after him thus. Right? He must be Brahma, the great Brahma, the conqueror, the unconquered, the omniscient, the omnipotent, the Lord God, the maker, the creator, the chief, the ordainer, the almighty, the father of all that are and that will be. By this law Brahma have we been created. What is the reason for that? Because we see that he arose here first and we arose after him. Because the being who first arose there had longer life, the greater beauty, the greater power. Because beings that arose later had shorter life and lesser beauty and lesser power. Now, bhikkhus, there is a case that a certain being, having fallen from that realm, comes here. Having come to this world, he goes forth from home life into homelessness. When he has gone forth into homelessness by means of exertion, by means of striving, by means of devotion, by means of diligence, by means of right attention, he touches mental concentration, such that he recollects that past life, but recollects not what is before that. He says thus, we are created by Lord Brahma, the great Brahma, the conqueror, all of that, right? The father of all that are and that will be. He is permanent, stable, eternal, not subject to change. He will remain so just as eternal self. But we have been created by that Lord Brahma and have come here to this world. We are impermanent, unstable, short-lived, subject to dying. This, bhikkhus, is the first reason based on which, invoking which, some recluses and Brahmins proclaim the self and world to be partly eternal and partly non-eternal. I feel like I can't comment on that paragraph. I'm a part of an interfaith council. All right. But I think it is quite clear, right? It is quite clear about how, and I remember there was this teacher who was who used to say, because of the small scope that we have of life, we consider devas or gods, who is a part of the Chatu Maharajika, Tusita, Tham. So we consider these people to be big, powerful sort of people, especially people like Lord Sakra, right? But in the grand sort of scheme of the universe, these people are very small, very, very small beings compared to the greater beings out there, right? And the greater powers which are out there, right? And the Buddha, I think, beautifully translates through the sutta to say, look here, wherever that you go, whatever that you experience, just like the Brahma wishing, Tani coming, with the loneliness. Oh, I wish there was someone else, right? I think that is a very human part of Brahma, don't you think? Don't we wish sometimes? If you're home alone, oh, I wish my husband comes back quickly. I hope my daughter comes back quickly, right? In a similar way, right? It is this flow of emotions, hindrances, difficulties, insecurities that we all seem to be sort of struggling with. Of course, the powers that we have as beings differ, but these seem to be quite similar within all beings of all minds in this universe, right? Be it as weak as a human, or as mentioned in the sutta, as powerful as a Brahmanas, right? And all because if our scope of life is shadowed by the small life that we have, cornered by the four walls of your house, right? This is going to be something so great. It is going to be something which is so difficult to let go of. It is going to be something that you will struggle to hold on to your entire life, regardless of what anyone tells you. Why? Because in your world, in your sense of attention, all you have are these four walls. Maybe a couple walls in Sri Lanka, couple walls in maybe, wherever. But at the end of the day, those four walls and whatever which is within. This is where the Buddha said, expand your mind. Expand your mind to understand that we are very, very, very small people in this sort of whole scale of things, right? In this whole scale of things. Even if we are to sort of speak about sort of things that we could do for the world, for the past how many odd years, Mahatma Gandhi's name was held with such high accord, but now with Black Lives Matter, it came out that Mahatma Gandhi was an absolute racist, right? People used to, of course, I knew for a while, but Mahatma Gandhi, a person who sort of speaks about poverty, right, who traveled in third class, right, third class of the train. But little did people know, when he got into the third class, he bought out the whole third class. So the poor people had to stand on the platform up until the next train, which they did not know when it came, because this man wanted to maintain his third class like lifestyle, right? People say, oh, I would love to have dinner with Mother Teresa. Mother Teresa was a thief. She stole from the Indian poor people and filled the coffers of the Vatican. Mother Teresa was not a respectable person. When people were dying of cancer and all these things, Mother Teresa did not give these people medicine. Mother Teresa told, oh, Jesus is kissing you. People used to tell her, oh, please tell God not to kiss me. It hurts too much. While when she fell ill, she went to America, California, to get the best treatment possible. She did not like God's kisses, obviously. I feel like when we understand the way the world works, right, we can sort of break out of these molds to really create something beautiful, pristine, and clean, which is not based on people, not based on the flaws of people, but based on true goodness, realizing, coming through, and true goodness. We say, oh, a child is really good, I don't think that goodness is the true goodness. Of course, the child is innocent. But even a child, if you lock a child up in a cave or a dungeon or a prison, right, for not doing anything wrong, but just lock it up and lock him up, or, and see him grow, even that child who grows within those cells will sort of develop hindrances, lust, anger, delusion, all of these things, right? True innocence, or true sort of that purity, comes through that sort of understanding of the world, not a delusion that we feed ourselves to help us go to sleep better, right? That is somewhat like, the people who can't go to sleep without a glass of whiskey, or without being numbed by a bit of alcohol, right? These petty things, we do not depend on these petty things. We sort of go behind that truth. So let us move on, right? Let us move on. The Kidda Padosika Devas. And secondly, bhikkhus, based on what? Now, this is the second one, remember, for the sort of the partial eternalism, right? The first one was the Brahmas, the second one was the Kidda Padosika Devas. Secondly, bhikkhus, based on what? Invoking what? Do the good recluses and Brahmins proclaim the self and the world to be partly eternal and partly non-eternal? There are bhikkhus, devas called, defiled by play, Kidda Padosika. They dwell much of the time immersed in the delights of laughter and play, right? Delights of laughter and play. From dwelling much of the time immersed in the delights of laughter and play, they become forgetful, and on account of their forgetfulness, these devas fall from that realm, quite much like us. Quite much like us. From dwelling much of the time immersed in the delights of laughter and play, they become forgetful. And on account of their forgetfulness, these devas fall from that realm. Now, bhikkhus, there is a case that a certain being, having fallen from that realm, comes here to this world. Having come here, he goes forth from home life into homelessness. When he has gone forth into homelessness by means of exertion, by means of striving, by means of devotion, by means of diligence, right attention, mental concentration, such, then he recollects that past life, but recollects not what is before that. He says thus: good Those good devas who are not defiled by play do not dwell much of the time immersed in the delights of laughter and play. Not dwelling much of the time immersed in the delights of laughter and play, these devas do not fall from their realm. They are permanent, stable, eternal, not subject to change. They will remain so just as eternity itself. They will remain so just as eternity itself. You know, in certain ways, this makes a lot of sense thinking about all of these books that I don't know if you have read about, you know, books from Paramahansa Yogananda, which is like a classic, which everyone should be reading actually, if anyone is in spirituality. You know, Paramahansa Yogananda's primary book is a classic about sort of the yogic life. You know, Paramahansa Yogananda, about Maharishi, about all of these books that I have come across and gone through. You know, you have this sense of, you know, speaking in the sense of, you know, permanence of the Brahmas and all these states that one would be in, right? And in this sutta, you find a very, I think, in a way, quite an understandable and acceptable sort of a reasoning behind that sort of mentality, which sort of governs that sort of thinking, right? Which governs that sort of thinking. Sort of like, in a way, we tend to, like the chicken and egg question on who comes first, we tend to sort of put a sort of a bridge in one and say one chicken is greater than the next other, right? And it is somewhat, I feel that it is very logical in this way to sort of understand, yes, it might very well be, it might very, very well be a sense of, you know, something that actually happened in the Aranya is, now this is Bhikkhu's gossip, but love a bit of gossip, especially if it's spiritual. All right. So what happened was, this monk, who is a friend of mine actually, and very, he used to work in New York for Wall Street. Yeah, he was a hi-fi sort of stockbroker, and then he, after his father's demise, he came to Sri Lanka, ordained under a particular forest monastery. And while he was in this monastery, now mind you, that I hadn't spoken to him. He had seen me in certain gatherings, but we didn't know each other personally. I did not know him. He knew me from whatever reason. And then he sort of got into sort of, you know, having come from that sort of background, obviously you go deep into and try to sort of excavate whatever you can quite fast with a sense of urgency. So whilst living in this monastery, this monk got really sort of dwelled into meditation, and quite fast he sort of he sort of went into sort of a state where the teacher said, or he rather said, that he was able to now communicate with the deities, right? Able to communicate with the deities. And obviously, because of his background and all of that, you know, others also believed him, you know. Of course, there were skeptics, people who were skeptical. And he sort of gave out a list of bhikkhus who were there and who were not yet ordained as well, who were supposedly people who had been born into the world to sort of protect and sort of to sort of guide the sasana into a brighter, better place, right? And there were a couple of names from the Aranyas which actually sort of shocked a lot of people, and some of them were like quite young, and who had just got ordained as well, right? And for some reason, although he hadn't met me by then, my name was also in the list, right? Which was quite peculiar because I did not know who this monk was. I had not spoken to him. He had seen me from afar when I visited that specific monastery. He did not know, I mean, probably asked another monk, but obviously I did not know him. And something which happened as a result of this, all these young monks who sort of, got to know now this monk is giving out a list, right? And these young monks were sort of, they went into the practice so hard that it was very difficult for them to sort of balance it out, right? To balance it out. You can understand, just imagine today you hear a Dhamma sermon, right? Tomorrow onwards, you're not eating you become a full vegetarian or vegan. You are no longer sleeping in the same bed with your husband or your wife. You have now sort of given all responsibilities of your children to your other partner. Just imagine something like that happens, right? Just in a day. Likewise, these monks, they absolutely disregarded everything and went full on into their practice with, sort of with steel heads almost. And after some time, it was very difficult for them, and some of them have actually disrobed as well. Now, because it was too much, it was absolutely too much for them to sort of handle. Especially with that sense of responsibility, which was sort of given to them through this whole list, right? Through this whole list. And in a very similar way, for some reason, I remember this story with regards to the Brahmajala Sutta. The views that we take on, that sometimes we sort of push ourselves into extents and depths that is completely unnecessary, right? Completely unnecessary, especially, for example, when it is said like you are here to do this, which is a little bit, if you are living a pure life of Dhamma, if you're doing that which is good, if you are a person who is relatable and has a lot of compassion in one's heart, Dhamma will flourish through you, right? Dhamma will flourish through you. You don't need to be sort of sent down specifically. That is the way that Dhamma works, right? That is the way that the Dhamma works. So coming down, it is all about, if we see, right? If we see, even when it says about how one sort of, look here, going into homelessness, exertion, striving, devotion, diligence, right attention, mental concentration, these are all things which pertain to the mind, right? All things that pertain to the mind. Your pujas, your danas, all of these other things is like the charcoal that you throw in to grow the fire, right? It's like the fuel that you put in to sort of kindle that fire inside of you that you work towards or work further in, right? The precepts is like the protection barrier to keep you from getting involved in things that disrupts the fire, right? In that way, we sort of secure ourselves in a position where we are able to sort of travel or sort of work towards that mental attainment, that mental sort of achievement, right? So coming back. All right. So moving on to the next. So the first one was, or Kidda Padosika Devas were those who would go to a position where you would see these devas, engulfed in laughter and all of that. You don't see anything beyond that. So you think that is the supreme, that is the end. Manopadosika Devas. And thirdly, bhikkhus, based on what? Invoking what? Do the good recluses and Brahmins proclaim the self and the world to be partly eternal and partly non-eternal? There are bhikkhus, devas called defiled by mind, manopadosika. They contemplate one another covetously much of the time. From dwelling much of the time contemplating one another covetously, they defile their minds. On account of their defiled minds, their bodies weaken, their minds weaken. These devas fall from that realm, from dwelling much of their time contemplating one another covetously. They defile their minds. On account of their defiled minds, their bodies weaken, their minds weaken. These devas fall from that realm. This is very true to all of us as well, right? This is very true to all of us as well. Now, bhikkhus, there is a case that a certain being, having fallen from that realm, comes here. Having come here to this world, he goes forth from home life into homelessness. When he has gone forth into homelessness, by means of exertion, striving, devotion, diligence, right attention, mental concentration, such that he recollects that past life, but recollects not what is before that. He says thus, those good devas who are not defiled by mind do not dwell much of the time contemplating one another covetously. Those good devas who are not defiled by mind do not dwell much time contemplating one another covetously. Not dwelling much of the time contemplating one another covetously, these devas do not fall from their realm. They are permanent, stable, eternal, not subject to change. They will remain so just as eternal self, eternity itself. Got it? Right? That is a second time. Right? But we were those defiled by mind, dwelling much of the time contemplating one another covetously. We defiled our minds. On account of our defiled minds, our bodies weakened, our minds weakened, we fell from that realm. We have come here. We are impermanent, unstable, short-lived, subject to dying. This, bhikkhus, is a third reason based on which, invoking which, some recluses and Brahmins proclaim the self and the world to be partly eternal and partly non-eternal. Right? Partly eternal and partly non-eternal. The reasoner, partly eternal and partly non-eternal. Right? That is also clear. Right? That is also clear. Thinking that if then you are good, you will forever be sort of eternal and you will go on just as eternity. The other one, the reasoner inquires partly eternal, partly non-eternal universe. And fourthly, bhikkhus, based on what? Invoking what? To the good recluses and Brahmins, proclaim the self and the world to be partly eternal and partly non-eternal. Here, bhikkhus, a certain recluse or Brahmin is a reasoner or inquirer, fabricating it through reasoning. Following a line of inquiry by his own wits, he says thus, that which is called eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, this self is impermanent, unstable, not eternal, subject to change. But that which is the mind, chitta, or thought, that is permanent, stable, eternal, not subject to change. It will remain so just as eternity itself. This, bhikkhus, is a fourth reason based on which, invoking which, some recluses and Brahmins proclaim the self and the world to be partly eternal and partly non-eternal. It is on these four grounds, bhikkhus, that a good recluse and a Brahmin proclaim the self and the world to be partly eternal and partly non-eternal. They do so on these four grounds, or on any one of them. There is none beyond this. Do we have any questions? All right, you can unmute yourselves. You can unmute yourself, Damsari. All right. Damsari, I can't hear you clearly.
This is very close to Aggañña Sutra. What is explained in Aggañña Sutra is the same thing, yeah? And it's more, now it's more scientific. Your contraction and expansion is actually explained in science very clearly the lifespan of this universe is only 25 um, uh, quadrillion years. That means 10 to the power 40.
Mm-hmm.
So that means in 10 to the power 40 years time, so the last proton will disappear from this universe. So
Mm-hmm.
that will be contraction.
Mm-hmm.
And so then the ambassador is also more scientific, because now even Professor Chandra Vikramasinghe with Professor Floyd, they come out with the idea that the life actually originated from outer space.
Mm-hmm.
So there's some justification,
Mm-hmm.
and so that in other way that supports the theory of evolution also, because you start with the unicellular Abhasara gene, and then you gradually develop into a fully blown animals and humans. So it's a
Mm-hmm.
very logical explanation
Mm-hmm.
uh, in in terms of science also.
Mm-hmm.
So that's very interesting. Yes.
Thank you, Damse. Thank you. Yes, Dil.
No, I was also going to say that this is just like the again Sutta, because when you read it, but but I've heard about it with Chandra, and then that is a personal friend of mine. Also, it's the same thing, that life has really come from outer from space, from other terrestrial. But there's also this thing that if it was really due to Darwinian theories and of evolution and things, that we couldn't have gone through this sudden change of a particular type of hominid that we had, because it takes eons and long time for them to change. But suddenly, about 200,000 years ago, there was this sudden change where the cerebral part of the brain, from the apes which were flat, suddenly where our memory and where all our executive skills, which were in the front part, suddenly we had this frontal bossing like what the humans have, from this flat shaped, sloping back again. And they attribute that to the fact that while the initially that when things came from the single cell and good, all that is kind of like evolution, but that's the point, that there was an intermingling of the DNA of the extraterritorial to what was developing like that according to all the theories of evolution. And that is why in a very short time, unlike in the rest of evolution, which has taken years, that the human, there were 6 types of something, subhumans at that time. And the one that could communicate, that's the one that interacted. There was one that could be grunts or sounds or something, didn't have speech. And all the other 6 or 7, I don't know, died. And that this is the only one that had some kind of interlinking with the extraterritorials, and that fusion and the DNA is what has, now they're saying why we have 22 pairs and not 23 pairs, and all this is gradually being now because of uh, of quantum physics are being exposed and people are seeing. But the problem is, because this is a whole uh, in the world, this is a change from the normal physics that we had, the Newtonian physics that became Darwin. We are changing it. The professors of the institutes that are seeing this research is coming out scientifically. They are unable to publish it because it will cause a huge, to rewrite books, and people have invested so much of money in what is already there. So as a result, these top professors are saying they don't want to divulge it, and a part of it is also the Christian church. They're also very powerful. But the scientists themselves, they're seeing that the new research is showing something entirely different. And they are saying now to the scientists who are doing research that we don't want to expose this now fully. So that's why, if you know personally of this, when they come for talks, Chandra and all, we talk about it. But it hasn't become mainstream in teaching in schools and a science should be, because it is all been proven now. Because they are saying, let's wait till these younger ones, when they come to like senior dons and professors and things, they can, by that time, the world will be much more accepting that this whole creation story and everything is not right, but that this is, the church is too powerful, the people are very evangelical and Christian, and the country that the money don't. So it'll be very interesting the next, they feel in the next couple of decades or so, the people who are young, who are doing this scientific research, because one of the professors was involved, he found that all his research was actually going counter, as soon as quantum physics came, to the Newtonian physics. And when he tried to show all this, people said, yes, what you're saying is right, but the world is not ready and we are not ready to change. So I think the younger people here, who will be there the next 10 or 20 decades or so, we'll find that all this will become mainstream, from the Agana Sutta to all these things which people were telling, and we only heard because people who were interested told us. But all these things people will have to accept, because you can't keep these the current evidence for so long. So I think we're living in a very interesting time, and I think we are very lucky that we have Bantes like you who are open, who read the scientific things and who bring these things, because lots of others people just explain the suttas but don't actually pinpoint. I mean, I heard about this sutta first of all because the High Commissioner came to London Buddhist and he was talking about the sutta, and then I hadn't even heard, and that made me go and speak to Chandra and things, and so that's the way the world is going. So I think, Bante, we are very fortunate that we have been taught by people like you, who are Theravada Buddhist monks, who are open and who give us these opportunity to discuss like this. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Deb. Yes, Samantha, do you want to ask a question?
I haven't. Well, I was just thinking about the sun. Obviously, the sun. It's all about energies. I don't really know much about all this. I haven't read much though, but from what I've heard is, obviously the sun's going to at some point die, and everything is dependent. Everything existing. Life is always the center point. Is the sun. And it's just a flux of energies everywhere, from vegetation, and that's obviously the vegetation and whatever, and the conversion of the energies, and it's just a cause and effect theory, I suppose, in a simple way. Whether how we I haven't read the Anatta Sutta in depth, what that relates to really.
Well, I think with regard to the sun, it's not really much a part of the Agana Sutta, it's more part of the Saptasura Sutta, which talks about the sort of the contraction and the rather dissolution of the sun. And but with regard, I don't think we should, with regards to this specific sutta, actually go down this road, to be honest, because this is more on the light of Buddhist cosmology, right? And within this sutta, what we are sort of trying to figure or try to understand are the ditthis, right? Are the ditthis. But of course, the sun is now cause and effect. With regards to cause and effect, we can of course connect it to everything.
Everything,
sun, moon, and everything. Right, but with regards to what I understand out of the Saptasura Sutta is that there are sort of more than what we could see. That is what is sort of the idea which is sort of given within the sort of doctrine or texts, that there is something beyond what is comprehensible through our naked eye, right? So
definitely, yes.
So but I think within this sort of doctrine, it is important to sort of realize the part that it plays with regards to the ditthis specifically.
Yes.
So anyways, thank you so much. So thank you all very much, and I will see you all. Next on Saturday. right, on Saturday. And if you are able to read Sutta, that would be really good, because then we could actually go faster, right? We could go a little bit faster if you are able to read the Sutta, right? So take care and have a good rest of the evening, right? Goodbye.
Bhante, can I just say one thing, Bhante, please?
Yes.
Right. Bhante, what Samantha was saying, in our universe, our sun and it's very important when we took up our solar system. So that refers to the sun having a really big impact about the dissolution of the world, of our earth and things. But this is talking about much bigger, the Buddhist cosmology of all the universes and the metaverses. And there are these two monks, they are living in Canada. One is Ajahn Punyavado and other one is Ajahn Soma. And he has written a book on Buddhist cosmology. And there is a wonderful there are 10 talks about, it's a question and answer, like the way sometimes that the Buddha taught. So Ajahn Punyavada, Ajahn Soma talks to him. These are all people who have come out of the Thai forest lineage. And there are 10 of those chapters. And they talk of all these, the 6 Devalokas, the Brahmalokas, and the immaterial realms. All of these, not only all of these realms, including the Kamavachara, Dugati, those for the human race, and the Sugati, the 6 Deva realms, and then all the 16 Brahma rays, including the immaterial realm. I mean, the kind of beings, how they get born there, and it's a big discussion. And there you can see that our sun and is according to Sapta Surya, it's about our own solar system. But when you go beyond to what the Buddha is talking about in this sutta, that's what he discusses. He has written a big book called Buddhist Cosmology, but it's fascinating to listen to these 10, I think there are 10 talks. I think they are available in YouTube also.
Yeah, I've heard a couple actually. Thank you, Dil. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Take care. Good night.
Good night, Bhante.